Welcome to the bonus content for the 5 levers to improve learning. On Monday's Anchored in Education, I had the thought-provoking leader, Dr. Tony Frontier, on to talk about the book he co-authored with Dr. Jim Rickabaugh, The 5 Levers to Improve Learning. If you haven't checked it out, you should do so now. As I said before, I haven't read a book like this in a long time that has caused such deep reflection and, at times, face-palming as I realized I've been pulling wrong levers. I had the opportunity to ask a few more questions to Tony, including one I think we all wonder about. Where did the idea for these 5 levers come from? The 5 levers are structure, sample, standards, strategy, and self, and they were not chosen at random. They are 5 tried and tested categories in which have been found to produce significant change. Let's hear Tony explain how the 5 levers came to be.
So Jim Rickabaugh and I worked together, and Jim's done some other books for ASCD. He was Wisconsin State Superintendent of the Year. I believe he was Minnesota State Superintendent of the Year. And in our work in Whitefish Bay schools, where we served together for about 10 years, as we would engage in change processes, as we'd engage in focus groups with teachers related to different initiatives, data retreats, etc. We kept coming back to, as we were categorizing and identifying patterns in information we were collecting. We found they kept coming back to some of these same core areas, and they also resonated with a lot of what we'd been reading in the literature, our own professional experience. So as we started to look around, we noticed that almost everything we do in the field can be placed into one of these 5 categories, but we hadn't really heard or seen any model or framework that helped create some of the clarity that the 5 lever framework can provide. So structure would be the logistical components, beams, bells, and buses, as I've heard it put. When do the bells ring? Who goes where? Where do we draw boundary lines? Choice, charter. So some of those broad type of elements, block scheduling, etc. Sample is related to which kids go where for which services. How do we deliver services to children? How do we group homogeneous, heterogeneous, tracking? All those types of issues. So we've got the structure of the school broadly. Then, okay, where are these kids going to go for services? That's sample. And those two have a set of truths that we use in our work. And then the other 3, and the more powerful 3, standard, strategy, and self. So standards, what are the areas of focus and expectations for quality related to student learning? Strategy, what are the strategies we use in classrooms to align student learning needs to results? And then the final lever, and most important, and the one that often kind of gets the least planning around, but sometimes gets the most, almost urgent care, is self. And that's conceptions of self. What does every kid believe to be true about his or her capacity to learn? What does every kid believe to be true about their teachers' beliefs in their capacity to learn? What do teachers believe about their own capacity to teach and their colleagues' capacity to teach? And again, that lever, incredibly powerful, but it's one we oftentimes kind of assume that everyone comes to school each day with the belief that they're capable of teaching and learning. And, the only time we have to tend to that is when there's, when we see aberrations or problems. But in reality, that's when we really need to start our strategic planning and the work we do with that component. David Livingston, who I did a book with Bob Marzano on effective supervision. David Livingston was principal out in Cherry Creek schools out in Colorado. And David ran one of the first schools in the country that had computers in individual classrooms.
Oh, interesting.
And so they had people from all over, all over the country would come in and look at their school and look at how they were using these, these Mac 2s or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And what he was struck by, the work that he built his school around was what do we want our students to be like? And as people came in with questions about the computers, all the questions were always about what do we want our school to look like? It was always about the logistics of, where do you get the computers, and what rooms do they go in, and who has how much time, um, and I remember that conversation with David as Jim and I were working on the framework actually, and it just really resonated with me as kind of emblematic, because I think when we talk about changes like standards-based report cards or personalized learning, uh, oftentimes people kind of go right to the logistics, and they
Right.
end up, they end up trying to implement the standards-based report card, but they don't have a standards-based system of aligned, instruction and assessment in their school, or they want to do personalized learning, and they end up ordering a bunch of tables and headphones, and they miss out on the whole piece of how do we empower uh, kids, voice and choice, but and help them, and help teachers and students build their own capacity to really demonstrate valid evidence of their proficiency in the standards.
There is really so much in standards, just in making notes as you're going. I think it goes back. We can even we can even simplify it even more in that I think not everywhere, but oftentimes we don't know or we don't understand the standards that we're supposed to be teaching.
I agree.
And I think that as we're looking at making changes involving standards, I think the first thing that we need to look at is, do we even understand the current standards the way they are? Because are we just going to change them to something else we don't understand?
Yep.
It's interesting as you speak about looking at change from the wrong viewpoint, and really change is hard just in
Hmm.
and of itself. And so I'm always reminded of this cartoon I've seen several times. The speaker's at the podium. He asks the crowd who wants to change, and of course everybody raises their hand. Uh, and then he asks who wants to change, and everyone's hand is down. Now, I don't think you will argue that change is difficult, but do you believe kind of what you were saying there? Many times we are viewing the impending change from the viewpoint of the wrong lever.
Yeah, and yeah, I agree with that metaphor. It's like, hey, change is good, but oh wait, you want me to do something
Right.
differently, right? Yeah, exactly. No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, change is difficult, and what we know from the literature on change and Shirley Hord's work, for example, out of the gate, all change is personal, right? So whatever system changes might be occurring, we always kind of ask that question. Well, hey, what do I have to do differently? A challenge with change that we describe in the book Five Levers to Improve Learning is related to, how do we align the type of change we're looking for with the magnitude of change. So quick example, um, sometimes the change we have to make is just to maintain the status quo. We just kind of need to roll over the events we did this year into next year's calendar, and no changes in beliefs, no changes in practices, just some changes in due dates and so on. And it takes a lot of effort and energy to maintain the system. We're always engaged in change, even if it's just to preserve the status quo. That the challenge there, though, is sometimes we confuse effort with results, or effort with expected results. So if we're doing a good job in our organizations tending to the status quo, and sometimes there are pieces we just need to tend to the status quo, that won't help the organization improve. It'll only prevent the organization from falling into decay.
Okay.
And we can spend all sorts of time, effort, and energy engaged in that type of change, but it just prevents um, things from getting worse essentially, or chaos. But then next level up would be transactional change, and with transactional change, the assumption is people know how to do the work, the beliefs are right on, and so on, but there are some logistical components that are going to be different, or maybe there are new incentives. So if we're implementing a new history textbook, let's say, it's really transactional change. It's, hey, here's a new resource, teach the way you always have, but your units are going to look a little different because we've got a new textbook here. Or, a one-to-one initiative can really be transactional change. Hey, everyone has a laptop now, everyone has access to this technology, but we're still largely going to teach the way we have
Right.
In the past. The problem with transactional change is, as leaders, transactional change can take a lot of time and effort. And you got to pull the committee together, and you got a lot of moving parts. And the challenge there, though, is we can make transactional change, but the people who use the system, they don't notice the difference. So, for example, if we shift over to a standards-based report card, and we change grading scales, and we do other standards-based grading practices, but if we don't change the underlying system of how do we help kids better understand what proficiency looks like and help kids move towards standards, we've literally made a transactional change in how we compute and calculate, but we haven't changed how we support students in their learning with standards. So transformational change, the third type of change or magnitude of change that we discuss, transformational change requires a shift in beliefs and a shift in practices. And the most powerful transformational change is when those beliefs and practices change, not only for the people who implement the system, but also for the people who use the system. So if a transactional change around grading and reporting is, hey, we moved to a standard-based report card or changed our grading scale, a transformational change would really be to be mindful of a system that really empowers learners to track their progress towards standards, for learners to be clearer about what is it I'm working toward this week or this unit or this year. Where am I now relative to goals, and what will I do to get better? So yeah, it's not just what changes,
Right.
it's what stays the same. It's who notices the change. It's what are the resources that the people not just implementing the change will need, but the people who for whom the change is designed to affect.
As I've mentioned many times before, Tony is an amazing author, educator, leader, thinker, you name it. Check out the full episode by subscribing to Anchored in Education on Apple Podcasts or Google Play, or visit escottengland.com. Thanks for checking out the bonus content.